The boarding gate was already crowded when Marcus Reed arrived. Business travelers tapped impatiently at their phones. A mother balanced a toddler on her hip. Two college students argued over who had the window seat. The departure board flashed, Flight 482 to Seattle. On time. Marcus adjusted the strap of his leather bag and walked calmly toward the priority lane. He was used to the looks: tailored navy suit, polished shoes, confident stride, dark skin. The gate agent smiled automatically at the passenger ahead of him. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. Enjoy first class." Marcus stepped forward and handed over his boarding pass. The smile faded. The agent scanned it once, then again. Her eyes flicked up to him, then back to the screen. "Sir, this boarding pass says 1A. "Yes, ma'am." She cleared her throat. "First class. I'm aware." A few people in line shifted subtly, listening without appearing to. She forced a polite smile. "One moment." She typed something into the computer. The printer beside her worked, but nothing came out. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked gently. "No, just verifying something." Behind him, someone muttered, "Unbelievable." He didn't turn around. After a long pause, she handed the pass back. "You may board. No apology." Marcus nodded once and walked down the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the cabin smelled of leather and recycled air. First class was quiet, spacious. Wide seats, soft lighting. He placed his bag in the overhead compartment above 1A and sat down. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a gray suit glanced at him, then at the seat number, then back at him. Marcus buckled his seatbelt and opened a small notebook. He wrote one line: "On time departure matters." A flight attendant approached with a tray of pre-departure drinks. She stopped mid-step when she saw him. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," Marcus said, smiling politely. "Sparkling water, please." Her eyes dropped to his seat number. "I'm sorry. What seat are you in?" 1A. She hesitated. "That's first class." He met her gaze. "Yes." A faint flush crept up her neck. "May I see your boarding pass?" He handed it over again. She examined it carefully, as if it might reveal something hidden. Passengers nearby began watching openly now. "Everything okay?" the man across the aisle asked loudly. "Just confirming," the attendant replied. Marcus remained still. She returned the pass. "I'll be right back." The murmurs started almost immediately. "I've seen this before. Probably upgraded himself somehow. Maybe he's lost." The words floated just loud enough. A second flight attendant appeared. Then a third. The first one pointed subtly toward Marcus. Jittered. The third attendant leaned down beside him. "Sure, there seems to be some confusion about your seating." "There is no confusion," he said calmly. "May we see your identification?" He paused. "Is that standard procedure for first-class passengers?" She forced a smile. "Random verification." The man across the aisle scoffed. "They don't ask me for IDs." Silence fell. Marcus slowly removed his wallet and handed over his driver's license. The attendant studied it. "Thank you." But she didn't move. Instead, she whispered something to the others. Moments later, two airport security officers stepped onto the plane. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop. One officer approached. "Sir, we need you to step off the aircraft." A collective inhale swept through first class. Marcus looked up at him. "On what grounds?" "There's a seating discrepancy." "There is not, sir. Please cooperate." Phones began lifting discreetly. The officer's voice hardened. "If you refuse, we'll escalate." Marcus exhaled slowly. Across the aisle, the gray-suited man shook his head. "This is ridiculous." "Sir," the officer said. "Are you refusing?" Marcus closed his notebook carefully and stood. "Let's clarify something," he said quietly. "You removing me from a flight for sitting in the seat printed on my ticket?" The officer avoided his eyes. "We just need to verify." "Verify what?" No answer. Passengers were fully recording now. As Marcus stepped into the aisle, the captain's voice suddenly crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The cabin fell silent. "We're experiencing a brief delay as we resolve a situation in the forward cabin." Marcus paused mid-step. The captain continued. "And I would appreciate it if everyone remained seated while I address it personally." The cockpit door opened. Footsteps approached. Every head turned. The captain walked down the aisle in full uniform, crisp white shirt, gold stripes gleaming under cabin lights. He stopped beside Marcus, and then he smiled. "Mr. Reed," he said warmly, extending his hand. Marcus shook it. The captain turned slowly toward the cabin. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." The flight attendants froze. Security stiffened. The captain's voice grew firmer. "Allow me to introduce Captain Marcus Reed." The words landed like thunder. A stunned silence engulfed the plane. The gray-suited passenger's mouth fell open. Phones tilted closer. The captain continued. "Captain Reed is the commanding pilot for this flight." No one moved. Security stepped back instinctively. The first flight attendant's face drained of color. Marcus adjusted his jacket slightly. "I was reviewing departure notes," he said evenly. The captain nodded. "As he does before every flight." A passenger near the back whispered, "Oh my God." The security officers exchanged uneasy glances. "I think we're done here," the captain added sharply. They exited without another word. The flight attendants stood frozen in humiliation. Marcus looked at them calmly. "I assume my sparkling water's still available." The cabin erupted into nervous, scattered applause. The first attendant hurried to retrieve the drink, hands trembling slightly. The gray-suited passenger leaned across the aisle. "Sir, I apologize." Marcus offered a small nod. "For what?" The man looked down. The intercom chimed again. "This is Captain Reed," Marcus said now, stepping toward the cockpit. His voice filled the aircraft. "I appreciate your patience. We'll be departing shortly. And I assure you, we are fully cleared for takeoff." A ripple of embarrassed laughter moved through the cabin. As the cockpit door closed behind him, the reality settled over everyone. They had tried to remove their own pilot. Were sitting in first class. The story could have ended there, but it didn't. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the video had already spread across social media. Multiple angles, clear audio, security demanding removal. The reveal headlines exploded before landing. Black pilot nearly removed from own flat. First-class discrimination goes viral. By the time they touched down in Seattle, reporters were waiting at the gate. Marcus remained composed, as always. He walked through the terminal in uniform now, hat tucked beneath his arm. Microphones followed. "Captain Reed, do you believe this was racial profiling?" He paused. "I believe assumptions were made." "About what?" "About who belongs where." The airline released a statement within hours calling the incident a regrettable misunderstanding. Public response was less forgiving. Hashtags trended nationwide. Frequent flyers shared similar stories. Aviation forums debated internal bias. 2 days later, the airline CEO requested a private meeting. In a glass conference room overlooking the runway, the CEO sat across from Marcus. "We value immensely," she said carefully. "Do you?" he asked calmly. "Of course." "Then why was my word insufficient?" She had no immediate answer. An internal investigation launched. The 3 flight attendants were suspended pending review. New verification protocols were introduced. Mandatory bias training expanded. But the most powerful moment came a week later. Marcus returned to the cockpit for another flight. As he entered first class to greet passengers, the entire cabin stood. Not in embarrassment, in respect. No whispers, no suspicion, just acknowledgement. He paused, slightly surprised. The gray-suited passenger from before happened to be on board again. He extended his hand. "Captain, thank you." Marcus shook it. "For flying?" he asked lightly. "For standing." Marcus smiled faintly. He stepped into the cockpit once more, closed the door, and adjusted his headset. "Tower, this is Captain Reed, ready for departure." His voice was steady, professional, unshaken, but something had shifted. Not in him, in the cabin, because everyone who boarded now looked twice, not with doubt, with awareness. They had witnessed how quickly authority could be questioned when wrapped in the wrong skin, and how power, when revealed, forced silence. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, passengers stared out at the clouds, quieter than usual. The lesson had been delivered before takeoff. C-1A was never the issue. Assumptions were, and 30,000 feet above the ground, guided safely by the very man they tried to remove, the truth traveled with them, calm, controlled, impossible to ignore. The aircraft leveled off above the clouds, engines humming with steady confidence. Inside the cockpit, Captain Marcus Reed adjusted the autopilot settings and reviewed the flight path with his co-pilot, First Officer Elena Morales. She glanced at him carefully. "You okay?" Marcus kept his eyes forward. "I'm flying. That's not what I asked." A faint smile touched his lips. "I've been questioned before." She hesitated. "Not like that. No, not like that. Not with security standing in the aisle. Not with passengers whispering like he was trespassing in his own space. Not with cameras recording what felt like a public audition for legitimacy." Alina lowered her voice. "You handled it with more restraint than I would have." Marcus leaned back slightly in his seat. "If I had reacted emotionally, the story would have changed." To what? To an angry black pilot refusing to cooperate? Silence settled between them, because they both knew he was right. Down in the cabin, the energy had shifted completely. The same passengers who had stared with suspicion now looked almost protective. A woman who had filmed the incident was replaying the captain's announcement quietly to the man beside her. "Captain Marcus Reed," she whispered again, as if saying it correctly now mattered. The gray-suited passenger across the aisle from earlier stared at his folded hands, jaw tight. Regret sat heavily on his face. When the beverage cart rolled forward again, the same flight attendant approached Marcus's empty seat, then paused awkwardly. The other attendant nudged her. "He's in the cockpit." "I know," she murmured. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued serving drinks. By the time the flight began its descent into Seattle, the airline's internal communication channels were already in chaos. Supervisors had seen the footage. Executives were calling emergency meetings. Legal teams were calculating damage control. When the plane touched down smoothly, applause erupted louder than usual. As passengers deplaned, several stopped at the cockpit door. "Thank you, Captain. We appreciate you." "Sorry you had to deal with that," Marcus responded with the same composed nod each time. After the last passenger exited, the 3 flight attendants remained behind. The lead attendant swallowed hard. "Captain Reed, we'd like to apologize." He looked at them evenly. "For the misunderstanding," she continued. "Which part?" he asked quietly. Her throat tightened. "The assumption," she admitted. He studied her for a moment, not unkindly. "Assumptions are rarely small," he said, "especially at 30,000 feet." None of them had a reply. Later that evening, Marcus sat alone in his hotel room overlooking the city skyline. His phone buzzed constantly, messages from colleagues, former classmates, even strangers. One text stood out. It was from his father. "Proud of you, not surprised." Marcus stared at the words longer than he expected. His father had been a mechanic for 30 years, a man who taught him early that excellence would not silence doubt, it would simply make doubt quieter. Marcus had chased aviation with relentless discipline, flight school, cargo routes, commercial certification, thousands of hours logged, every stripe on his sleeve earned, and still, Seat 1A had required proof. The next morning, national news programs replayed the clip again. Panelists debated bias in professional spaces. Commentators argued whether it was an honest mistake. But the most powerful segment aired when the anchor paused the video right before the reveal. "You can see here," she said, "how quickly suspicion escalates when authority doesn't look like what some expect." The airline's stock dipped slightly that afternoon. Public pressure mounted. Within 72 hours, the airline announced sweeping changes, crew verification protocols, new bias training requirements, and a revised policy preventing passenger removal without supervisor clearance. Privately, executives admitted what they would never say on camera. The optics were devastating. A week later, Marcus walked through another airport terminal in full uniform. This time, something was different. Passengers glanced at him, then did double takes. Not with confusion, with recognition. A young boy tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mom, that's him." She smiled warmly. "Yes, it is." The boy approached shyly. "Are you really a captain?" Marcus crouched slightly to meet his eyes. "Yes, I am." The boy's face lit up. "I want to be one too." Marcus handed him a small wing pin from his pocket. "Then start now." The child ran back to his mother, clutching the pin like treasure. Marcus stood slowly. That moment felt heavier than any headline. Back on board his next flight, he took his seat in the cockpit once more. He ran through the checklist with steady precision: fuel levels, weather clearance, navigation confirmed, outside, Baggage handlers moved briskly beneath the wing. Inside the cabin, passengers settled in without question. Seat 1A remained empty until the final boarding call. A businessman stepped into it confidently. No one challenged him. Marcus keyed the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Reed speaking. We're number 2 for departure." His voice carried calm authority through the cabin. No hesitation, no suspicion, just trust. As the engines roared and the aircraft accelerated down the runway, Marcus felt the familiar lift beneath him, the smooth, powerful ascent into open sky. Up there, above assumptions and noise, clarity returned. But he knew something permanent had changed below. The footage would remain online. The memory would remain in those passengers' minds. The moment when security tried to escort the pilot off his own aircraft would not fade easily. And maybe that was necessary, because sometimes exposure accomplishes what silence never could. As the plane climbed into the clouds once more, Marcus looked out at the endless horizon. Seat 1A had never defined him. Neither had their doubt, but the way he handled it, calm, controlled, undeniable, would echo far longer than the humiliation ever could. Cruising altitude reached, Elena said softly. Marcus nodded. "Thank you," she added quietly. "For what? For reminding everyone who belongs in the captain's seat?" He adjusted his headset and looked straight ahead. "I never left it," he replied. And 30,000 feet above the ground, guided by the very hands they once tried to remove, the aircraft cut through the sky, steady, unwavering, and impossible to question.